again, everybody, to Wrestling and Everything Coast to Coast. Russell Jackman and myself, of course, Buddy Satella. And I'm bringing aboard a guest. This is on 9/11, so of course we want to pay our respects, the 21st anniversary of this event, and it touched so many lives, as did the death of Queen Elizabeth, which is major story, because for Herb Simmons and myself, Mr. St. Louis, as I call him, she's been the only monarch we've known. And for many other people, I think less than 5% of the planet knew her father. But also want to pay respect to Ernie Shavers, an incredible boxer in the Ali era. He had, one fight with Ali, one with Larry Holmes. A great guy, died at 79. We didn't get to pay respect to him last time. But Mr. St. Louis, Herb Simmons, knew and worked with an idol of mine in Sam Muchnick. I was blessed to have shot X amount of events there that Herb's great friend, R. Larry Matisick, always got me pressed for. But Herb is promoter of Southern Illinois Championship Wrestling. He has a book, at least one book, co-author on Wrestling at the Chase, a beautiful book, and has done so much for the wrestling industry. He does things for the Iowa Wrestling, the Thez Tragus Museum Hall of Fame, now for Cauliflower Alley, for everything. And Herb, thanks a bunch. Really appreciate you. Want to thank your daughter, Jessica, for helping you with Skype to get you booked on the show. So you're a co-promoter for the night, Jessica. Big thank you to Jessica, Herb's daughter. But Herb, St. Louis was the epitome for me, which is why I had my Sam Muchnick weekend, for the boys thing in 1991, a 3-day convention. The boys all trans themselves in. It was like Cauliflower Alley. I didn't have to pay for any of them, from my MC Lou Thez to Ernie Ladd to, a zillion wrestlers. They did that not for me, but their love and respect for Sam, who has love and respect from the entire sports community of St. Louis, the state of Missouri, and Kansas, the state of Kansas. He was a big deal as part of Major League Baseball as a sports writer. So St. Louis, one of the greatest sports towns in the world, and Sam was right at the epicenter, which is why he has all that credibility, which is why Bob Costas has talked about him relentlessly, and many other legit top-of-the-line people in the sports world, non-wrestling sports world. What is Herb, were you born and raised in Missouri, in St. Louis?
I was born in Illinois, right across the river from St. Louis, Missouri. And your comments of Sam is right on point. Sam was to the wrestling industry and business to what Babe Ruth was to baseball. It wasn't just here in St. Louis, even though that was kind of a misconception for many, many years. They always thought everybody had their territories, and it ran from here to there. Sam's territory consisted of St. Louis, and that's what he wanted, and that's where he ruled with a iron fist was right here from a beautiful downtown St. Louis, Missouri.
And the Keel, and of course the Chase, which Smashing Pumpkins' Billy Corgan has come into.
I think we lost you, Mike.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you lose my audio?
Hello?
Can you hear me?
I can still hear you.
Okay. But
yeah.
Herb, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay. What I was saying was Wrestling at the Chase, later the Czech was involved when they were maybe events that would draw a larger crowd, the air-conditioned, as it was advertised, Checkerdome. But the Chase Hotel held the tapings were, and I went to only a few of them, 5 different times in the 70s. But they were the Sunday tapings, weren't they? The Sunday afternoons at the Chase Hotel?
Well, that's a lot of history even before that. In fact, you mentioned the book that I helped author Ed Wheatley here just recently write the coffee table book on. One of the issues that him and I had a dispute over is that they originally, back in the day, started taping on Wednesday nights, and he argued with me that there was no documentation of that. He couldn't find that anywhere in the archives. And I had a tape from 1962 with Joe Garagiola. He was the first play-by-play announcer that started in 1959.
Well, a baseball Famer and the host of the Today Show. It couldn't get any bigger than Garagiola. And later,
yeah,
he was his brother,
yeah.
correct? He would succeed him doing ring announcing.
Yeah, Mickey would. And Joe was quoted as saying many times, out of the jobs that he had, the wrestling at the Chase, doing the play-by-play was by far the fondest, fun time he had in his career. In fact, I remember sitting at Mickey's funeral in between him and Yogi Berra, because they all grew up on the Hill in St. Louis. And Joe was telling that story about how even as he went on and later on in life, he never forgot where Sam got him started in the play-by-play announcing. But yes.
Yeah, I'd like to ask you about how you got started in professional wrestling, where your origins came from, since you're one of the OGs of St. Louis.
Well, and believe it or not, that is the easiest question to answer. I got involved as a fan, as we all did. I mean, I assume that you helping Mike. I know Mike got into
Russell's a heel manager. Russell, as Buddy Satella, heel wrestler in the Northern California, West Coast area. So, but we all started as fans, as marks.
Always started it, yes. And then I had the opportunity of my dear late friend, Larry Matisick, my greatest friend ever, got me into the business as far as I was doing independent shows. And of course, back then, he started with Sam when he was 16 years old and never really had any other job but with Sam Muchnick until, Sam retired. Then he went to work for Vince McMahon for 10 years, which was the worst job he ever had. He hated it from day one. But and
I get into that too, because when Sam retired, and there was a huge retirement show similar to the Paul Bosch one in Houston, where like everybody in the business came in because these were the two most beloved guys and the most honest promoters. There were, some others like Papa Gus Karras, who worked for Geigel in KC, who was a legendary gentleman. I've never heard anybody say anything but glowing stuff about Gus Karras. They all loved the guy. And I'm talking everyone from Mike George to Easy Ed Wiskowski, anybody that Jesse Ventura, Jimmy Brunzell, they all loved him.
You won't find nobody to say anything bad about him.
No, and everybody. But I do want to add, well, let me take it further. I can throw a question into Russ's mouth. What was the first live show that you can recall that you went to? We'll just pretend that Russ asked this because I'm sure he would ask it. What was the first show you went to, if you can recall most of it? Say whether it was a Muchnick card, which I'm going to assume it is. Or what?
Yeah, well, like I said, I started going to the wrestling at the Chase tapes. You had to be 16 years old to get inside of wrestling at the Chase. In fact, one of my young men who still work for me to this day, Gary Jackson, we used to sneak him in when he was about 14 years old. His mother worked with Mickey Garagiola at the Ruggeri's restaurant, and where Mickey worked at. And so I started going there back, I guess one of the first cards I saw that I can remember, Johnny Valentine was on, because he was always one of my favorites. But I had the honor and privilege of going with Larry. And I think one of the highlights of my entire career is going to the office with Larry and sitting in there and listening to Sam be sitting there talking to Gene Kiniski in the office, or Whipper Billy Watson. And Sam always told us, he said, what you hear in this office stays in this office. And he actually told us that we could look through any of the files. Nothing could leave the office, of course. But you talk about a kid at a candy shop. I mean, and to think I've got a lot of those records to this day that after Larry passed away, he left to me. Contracts, and I've got all the matches that ever took place in St. Louis, either at the Chase or at the Kiel or the Checker Dome. And anybody who ever wrestled, they used to type them up on 3x5 index cards like your grandmother had on her recipe cards, and down to Dick the Bruiser against John Paul Henning, and Dick won in 4 minutes and 32 seconds with the atomic drop, very interesting statistics. And I've got all them, and I've got programs that date back to 1934 that Sam had. So
are those all published on a website anywhere, or is that?
No, I've got them. I've got them all in storage, and I've my goal in life as I reach my next February will be my 50th year. Someday, if I ever decide to retire from my day job, I've got a dream of having a small museum building, because I've got, like I said, and I've got not only all the St. Louis tapes, TV tapes. Like I said, the oldest I got goes back to 1962, up till about 1983. But then I acquired Dick the Bruiser's library from his wife before she passed away. So I've got all the TV tapes from there.
Rhea Athlas had she had quite a bit of stuff, because I thought Jerry Jaffe, sort of in concert, or maybe not, with George Cannon, had gotten Bruiser's WWA stuff.
They got some of them, but they were ones that had already been downloaded. I've actually got the TV tapes that were still on the 1-inch TV reels.
Wow.
In fact, Dick's ex-son-in-law, Spike Huber, and Dick's stepdaughter, Michelle, actually is the one who helped me negotiate the deal with Louise before she passed away. She was living in Florida. In fact, Spike actually drove to Florida and unloaded them out of the garage and brought them back to Memphis, and I went there and picked them up. And so I've got them. I've had a couple of them downloaded because I wanted to check the quality of them, which is good because they're still on the original TV tapes. And and there's stuff floating around out there. Same way with the St. Louis footage. Larry and I reproduced 12 volumes of the St. Louis Wrestling Classics, and we were working on volume 13 when he passed away. And people have bought them, and they've taken them and downloaded them 100 times and sold them. And people say all the time, "Oh, you ought to sue them for copyright violation." Well, I'm an old man, and I don't care about that. I'm just glad that they're out there keeping the history of St. Louis wrestling alive, because that's what I've been doing all these years.
That's why I asked you when we spoke earlier if the folks, either Brian Gewirtz or Dwayne Johnson's people, for this new Vice Network series that starts in about a month, the territories. I mean, how can you not start with St. Louis rather than, Dwayne Johnson, which is fine, but I mean, one on his mom's promotion. No, the major promotion of Hawaii was Ed Francis, Lord Blair's, and she came along later, pushed him out of the way. This was a guy who wrestled. His kids were all NFL superstars like Russ. They all dabbled in wrestling, most notably Russ Francis, who was a 49er, as Russ will appreciate. Our Russ here. But
yeah, I was always a big fan of Russ Francis.
Yeah. I just got a call this week from WWE wanting some of the tapes of the Bruisers, because they're getting ready to induct the Steiners into the Hall of Fame. And they're looking for Steiner's first match against the great Wojo. And I've got that, and
Wojciechowski, right?
Yes. So they contacted me Wednesday and wanted to see if I would make it available to them, and I said, well, we'll talk.
So are you in the process of converting all these things to digital? Because one thing that I'm worried about is that, especially with the 1-inch tapes, those are very delicate and they're not going to last forever. I mean, I'm amazed they've lasted this long and still are good quality.
Well, I can tell you, I'll give you a good example. The Wrestling at the Chase tapes, that 1962 tape that I got, it's got Johnny Valentine on it, Pat O'Connor against Lorenzo Parenti. When we first did that 20 plus years ago now, when I had it downloaded, when we first took it to our production guy, and he said, "How old is this thing?" And Larry told him, he said, "Well, it's 1962. And he said, "Wow." He said, "I bet it's going to be sawdust when I open it up." And he had the machines back then to do it. And I mean, quality is excellent on it. The thing that deteriorates a lot of them quickly is when you tape over them or you play them a lot. But to answer your question, yeah, I've had 2 of them done. It's quite expensive to get them done. The one thing is, it's hard to find somebody who can do it. I've only been able to find a company in Arizona that did these 2 for me. But it's expensive to get that done. But yeah, we're going to get it done eventually. But I got a couple of hundred hours of tapes. I got his Bruiser Bedlam show that he did. That was all part of the deal, along with a lot of the programs that he had and pictures. And so, but I do want to get that done. And then, like the Wrestling at the Chase stuff, not only have I got it down digitalized, I got it stored in the cloud also.
That's great. That's great. Thank you for doing that to everybody.
I wanted to ask you too. I'll get with you on that because Pepper Gomez, a name that you know.
Knowing well.
A 1962 Roy Shire original. I've not even been able to view it because it's on film. Old show, TV show from Channel 2 in Oakland, California, when Roy was still allowed to film there every week. But a funny story, if you didn't know, Roy Shire was booted out in late 1969, early 70 because he refused to stop spitting cigar juice on the floors. This is our top non-network affiliate in the Bay Area, Northern California. And then he got stuck scrambling around for TV. So we went to a lowly station, like another hour and a half drive away from San Francisco in Sacramento, Channel 40 for his TV. But his lead announcer, who was like calling games for the A's and an on-air newscaster for Channel 2, called the wrestling, sort of like a Joe Garagiola, not quite at that level, refused to make that longer drive. He lived in San Carlos, was already a good hour and a half, 2 hours to San Francisco, add another hour and a half. And he quit because he was also doing all the play-by-play for Jerry Seltzer's roller derby. They were big-time global roller derby, not the Griffiths family in Los Angeles roller games stuff. So
now wrestling and roller derby always went together. The Bay Area Bombers, Joni Weston, people like that.
Yes, it was
a similar crossover audience. Ray Stevens, when he was fighting cancer and disobeying the doctors at Stanford Hospital, would go to Charlie O'Connell's bar in Hayward, California at night, sneaking out when his ex, who was a lady wrestler who actually claimed she broke him into the biz, Teresa Thies, said she broke Ray into the biz before they got married in like 1956, something like that, Memphis. And she'd go to sleep. He told me right on my TV show, he would sneak and go to. So there was a lot of crossover. And the Moolah of roller derby, Ann Calvello, and I'll get off this in a second, she skated in 7 decades. She wanted to equal Lou Thesz's, who she knew Lou. Yeah. She wanted to equal Lou Thesz's record of 7 decades. But in her industry of derby, which is like wrestling on skates, and but she would pal around in like Hawaii when derby would go over to Hawaii in the early 70s. She would pal around with Pepper, who she had an affair with, Ray Stevens, Pat Patterson, and Nicky Bockwinkel, all names Herb knew. And that was one of the best matches. I forget if it was at Kiel. I think it was at Kiel where Ray worked with Pat O'Connor. It was like a 20-minute Broadway. But I just want to throw some of the matches I saw because I want to ask you about Buddy Rogers' history with Sam and St. Louis. I don't know how many times, it's say in the early 60s when the title went to him, and then there was, the creation of the Tri-WF, and then it was to our surprise. And what was the year? It's like 77 when Vince Sr. joined the NWA and started attending the Vegas meetings.
Right.
And that was like a surprise to everybody, but he was and had remained close to Sam and Vern Gagne and Eddie Graham in particular.
The rumor was Sam was the one that got him to become a member of it.
How and why did that come about? Because the Tri-WF or Capital Sports broke away from the NWA.
Yeah. I never did get all the story of that, but I remember Larry doing a lot of in-depth talk about that and how, like you just said, it was such a surprise to so many people. You couldn't see that coming, and but it did. So,
which is why he must have been rolling over in his grave with Vince Jr. Sort of disrespecting the boundaries, and that's why this territories thing. How can you brings me back to my point? How can you not start with that? Because it was kind of incredible. He was kind of like a Bowie Kuhn or any czar of sports, meaning Sam, for decades and decades, sort of almost like Queen Elizabeth. He was there as NWA president for so long, whatever year when he and Lou, etc., decided to do that. And at the same time, he has that massive global job as NWA president, with the ties to Ricky Dozan and then Baba's All Japan.
Because, at one time, Lou and Sam, they were in competition. They didn't see eye to eye. I don't know if you knew that or not, but
was that in the late 40s?
In the late 40s, yes. And they had separate promotions going on. And I'll have to show you, Mike. I've got some of the programs. Sam had put together hardbound books of all those programs that they had each show, and he had them in these, and I mean they're in good shape. And I've got every volume of them from Sports Printers, is what's on. It's got Sam Muchnick, and it's got the years 1949 to 1952, and then 1952 to 1955. And there's full of all these, Gorgeous George, and you name it. Everybody who came to St. Louis is on these programs.
And while you're bringing that up, who are some of the favorite talents that you remember working with? And
well, that was my point. On St. Louis, you were invited. It was a great honor, like being invited to wrestle in Japan. So only the cream of the crop of talent. If you were the shits in the ring, you were never invited to come to work for Muchnick at the Keel, or later Larry, etc. So it was the cream of the cream. Crusher, Bruiser, Valentine, Kiniski, all the NWA guys, the top guys. But I'll let.
But of those cream, who were the ones that you enjoyed personally working with?
Like I said, the list goes on, because as Mike just said, you had to be the cream of that crop. And I'll give you an example. Ric Flair. Ric Flair made it to St. Louis because of Larry Matisek. And the story on that is that Larry had got video sent to him from the Crockett's. And and I was there the day that came in. We were sitting in the studio, and he was looking at it. Pat O'Connor walks in, and Larry's trying to tell Pat, "Hey, this guy can do some business for us." And O'Connor says, "Oh, he's too small. He won't draw a dime." And Larry and I looked there, and there was the producer of Channel 11 KPLR, Ollie Hofstetter was his name. And I looked at Larry, and Larry looked at me, and I said, "Man, I don't know what Pat's looking at." And Larry, God, good thing, he got on the phone. He called Sam at the office and said, "Hey, if you're not doing anything, can you come down to the studio?" He said, "I want you to see something." And it was about 45 minutes later, Sam shows up. He walked in, he looked at the tape for about 5 minutes. He's told Larry, he said, "Get on the phone with Crockett and tell him I want him in here." And to this day, Rick will tell you that if it wasn't for Larry Matisek, he probably would have never made it to St. Louis. But, people like Gene Kiniski, Big Thunder. Like I said, I can't tell you the times I'd walk in and Sam would be sitting on the phone talking to Gene on the phone. They had a issue where and I can't remember who it was. They had a match lined up at somebody. Oh, it was Dory. Remember when Dory had his accident and or claimed to have the accident? And they were looking.
So he wouldn't drop the strap directly to Briscoe.
Yes, and it was that he had 24 hours to replace somebody. But that was one thing Sam prided himself in too. If he advertised somebody, he was darn well going to make sure that person got there, or somebody of equal credibility was going to be taking that place. And the story behind that, it was actually late night. Larry and Sam are on the phones trying to figure out what are we going to do. We got to get somebody in here, and a big main event. And it was Larry's wife that just happened to throw out the name Gene Kiniski. And they got Gene on the phone late that evening. And the next day when they showed up in the office, there was Gene sitting outside the office waiting to get in. So, people like that, Dick the Bruiser, they all came through St. Louis. There was some guys that, one guy in particular that came to St. Louis one time and was never invited back, and that was the Sheik. Because Sam didn't go for the throwing of the fire and all of that stuff.
Well, he's just Ed. I asked Ed. I ran the Sheik's fan club in the mid '60s. And asked him about that much later, and he said Sam had told him no brawling outside, either chase or keel. I forget if he made both.
It was a keel.
And he disobeyed that, but he was just there primarily to do some business.
Sure.
Away from the ring, and then, okay, we'll throw him on the show. I don't know why Sam had to know what Sheik's gimmick was, but Eddie Farhat said, meaning the Sheik himself,
the original Sheik, yeah.
The real Sheik, the fireball throwing, one of the greatest heels of all time, not a classic St. Louis Bruiser or any of those guys in their day, but great heel, because I shot him.
Great guy.
And I shot him in Toronto, at Maple Leaf, at Cobo, etc., in L.A., where he had a big history. But yeah, that was bizarre. And I have John Toko's photos he took. I wasn't there for that when Sheik came in, and he was all dressed to the nines, that famous suit that he always wore when it was something important, like an NWA Vegas meeting. But let me ask you, as a longtime photographer since the 60s, you had to have known John Toko. He was like, when Roger Dean was much later, around 76. He was running Eddie Gilbert's fan club and living in Missouri, I think.
And Mike Ratchner. Yeah,
Mike Ratch was a big photographer prior to promoting for First Gagne. And then Gagne,
I got a lot of Mike's old photographs.
Really?
Yeah.
He was going to make my St. Louis thing. Were you at my 3-day thing?
Yeah,
okay.
I was there for a short time. I was running in between jobs at that time, my job. But I think the amazing part of that is the amount of talent that you had there. And I remember thinking to myself, how does anybody afford this? And then later on,
I didn't risk a dime.
I know. Later on, I found that out, so I had my question answered.
Well, so it was because
there was a lot of talent there.
It wasn't because of me, and then I already had Jack Lanza had promised to bring in, because the timing of it, which I planned, was WWF and WCW were having house shows not that far away. I think both were in Illinois. So Lanza brings in Bob Backlund with all his history as Missouri state champion. He brought in X number of guys, some with history in St. Louis, some not. Obviously, Teddy DiBiase brings in DiBiase, huge St. Louis history. But he brought in Kamala and Wyndham and Mike Rotunda and Kurt Hennig. And then Watts had already promised me guys from WCW, but then it was when he was getting canned, and Dusty filled in and sent Dustin and a few guys during the daytime, because they had the shows at night. But I had all of these folks, and then I've been going back and forth with Harry White. This is the weird thing, very quickly. You may not, I've got two things you may not know. That Harry White passed away, sadly left his beloved St. Louis when he got married. I think he moved to Dallas. And But he told me, and he showed me. So I'm there going back and forth for the whole year before my convention in St. Louis, May of '91. And Harry's meeting up with me. He goes, look at all this stuff I got from Julie O'Connor. And when Julie brought the entire family, I also had the whole family of Bobby Shane. That's where he started, very popular. And Guy Brunetti and Joe Tangaro, their families. And Mrs. Tootsmont just came in unannounced. Tootsmont. I don't know if she was in there, but she showed up there, and it blew me away because I didn't know anything. I didn't know where she lived. I didn't know to invite her, but she came when she heard about this stuff. But so Harry White said during a weak moment, this was before my convention, that he got Julie to just give him a bunch of office stuff from Sam when Pat bought the office. And that included the Missouri state title, which I told him, do not sell any of this stuff. It should be the Missouri state title, and he got the Central States tag belts from Geigel. And then he had a bunch of check stubs from wrestlers from the St. Louis Wrestling Club, where Sam or the secretary would make it out to the wrestler would endorse it, and Sam had retained all of these. You may have some of these. I have a few that Harry gave me, but Harry frickin' sold the Missouri state title to some mark in Japan with big money. This is before it was eBay. And then he sold, at least the Central States tag belts went to a good guy in Portland, Oregon, historian Mike Rogers. It's got, I don't know if I told Mike, as I did Harry, give some point this to the Thes Tragus Museum, Mike Chapman's original museum. Mike was still part of it at the time. so people can share. So this stuff will be preserved. It won't be in some guy's house in Japan where nobody can see one of the most famous titles, probably second or tertiary to the NWA title and the NWA Junior title that we most associate with Danny Hodge, Hiro Matsuda, Jerry Briscoe, etc. But it just irked me to no end that Harry did this and then admitted it. And he's shown me stacks and stacks. I have just maybe 5 of them. I've got a Johnny Valentine, Frank Goodish, Bruiser Brody one, and several others over the years. But Harry had all of these St. Louis, so that bugged me. But one positive thing you may not know, and it involves Muchnick and Kiniski, Big Thunder, and Kowalski, and I got included on a couple of these calls. It's like every Saturday morning, Gene said that he, on a 3-way call, would bring aboard Walt Kowalski. They were both, people don't know, Walt was not quite the gun enthusiast that Gene was, but Gene was a major gun enthusiast. And then they would call and like rib Sam. Sometimes the ribs, on the phone would involve rifles and guns, sometimes not, but they would like, and Sam knew what was going on. Every time they call on Saturday, he knows it's going to be those guys, but he played along with it. I got to hear some of it, but I'm bringing up the camaraderie, the brotherhood that those guys had, the love. And I got to shoot. St. Louis was fun. The few cards I was lucky enough, X amount of cards, styles clashes. I shot Briscoe defending the NWA strap at Kiel against Ed Carpentier, against Bobo, who he had to carry. Bobo was not the Bobo of the 50s, 60s physically, but Jack made him look like $1,000,000. And a non-title match because Dory didn't have the strap anymore. You remember this, or Dory against Killer Kowalski at Kiel.
Oh yeah.
And that was insane. That match was off the charts. And, for anybody that loves pro wrestling, it was like the absolute epitome. But it was a styles clash. It's like Fred Blassie I shot at the HIC in Honolulu against Billy Robinson, and Fred refused to bump or sell for Billy Robinson, who was getting really pissed off. Not a guy you want to get pissed off. It was, and it had 70 mega show.
Can you name any better, bigger heel than Kowalski?
No, he's up there with my top. He and Sheik on a global scale, because Kowalski came in, was our killer heel in '72.
Yeah, that's what we used to call him, the punch kick heel.
Yeah, he was absolutely incredible, but one of the sweetest guys, and a lot of people.
Oh yeah.
When Bruiser Brody was in St. Louis, was he more of a heel or was he more of a face?
He was whatever he wanted to be, really. Again, and I tell the story, I just had it. We did TV tapings today for my little TV show we do. And I was telling the guys, I can take the biggest heel and turn him baby in one show or vice versa. And it all depends who Frank was going against. I mean, him and Flair had 3 one-hour Broadways in St. Louis. And of course, at that time, Bruiser Brody was larger than life. I mean, I've got a big stand-up, life-size photo of him and Larry and Sam here on my living room wall. I mean, but those 3 are the 3 that I give all the credit to in the world. Sam and Larry, of course, early on, but the best time of my career is when they introduced me to Bruiser Brody, because then from there, he introduced me to the guys like Blackwell and Murdoch and Greg Valentine and people like that, Tojo Yamamoto and Gypsy Joe. And, the list just goes on and on. Kamala, we produced the only show at the fabulous Fox Theater in St. Louis, and had all those guys on the card. And yeah, those 3 guys are the ones who really got me known in the business.
Herb,
I've always asked this question before.
Hang on a second. Russell, hang on a second. Because I know with Larry, I'm pretty sure Frank was billed under his most common name of Bruiser Brody. But with Sam, out of deference to Dick the Bruiser, he was King Kong Bundy there. I don't think Black worked for Sam, but did he come in as something other than Crusher Blackwell for Larry when Larry started promoting?
No, and the story on Frank Bruiser Brody, King Kong Brody, I've heard so many stories about that. And, it was the fight between Dick the Bruiser and Bruiser Brody, which they did have a legitimate fight, but it took place in Peoria, Illinois. the night I was in the locker room when that happened, and that was over money. The reason why they changed Bruiser Brody's name in St. Louis, Sam told Larry, said, we got 3 bruisers in town, and I don't want that. And at that time, it was Dick the Bruiser, it was Bruiser Bob Sweetan, and then Bruiser Brody. And they came up with, that's when they ended up putting Frank on the marquee outside the arena, if you remember that, Mike, when they gave him the name King Kong. In fact, the lady who, Angie Warner, still is in Belleville, Illinois. She actually attended Larry's funeral. She was the lady portraying Fay Ray in the King Kong movie, you know, was what they were doing. There's Frank up on the marquee, and he's they got the word wrestling spelled out in big black letters, and he's holding the T, and hey, come to the blah, blah, blah. And then another shot there, he's holding her in his arms like King Kong did. And the day they were doing the shoot, it took them almost all day because it was so windy up there. The microphone was picking up all the air noise, and it was Frank's suggestion. They actually they had the microphone pinned to her dress, and it wouldn't block the air noise. He took it and actually pinned it up underneath his beard to keep the wind noise down. So we give Frank all the credit for that.
Built-in windscreen right there.
Yeah, built-in windscreen.
You know, one of the things I'm always fascinated with, because we've had a number of people from St. Louis and from the territory.
We had Darla on about a month ago, and she put you over her.
Darla don't know nothing about St. Louis wrestling. No, I'm going to tell you. You know, she was, and believe this, she was at the first card of Dick Hutton in 1959. Did she tell you that?
Yeah, she was 6 months old in her parents' lap.
And her dad's running around ringside with his 6-month-old child in his hand. And I don't know if she told you, but we were talking about that, and I have that program, and so I made her a copy of it and sent it to her.
Oh, that's nice.
So she'd have it.
But what do you feel about the city of St. Louis and its inhabitants that made St. Louis wrestling different than the other territories?
Well, you know, I'll be real honest with you. No Sam Muchnick, no wrestling in St. Louis. And Mike said that early on when we started.
But credibility was what Sam had.
It was credibility, honesty, integrity. Him, Paul Bosch. I met Paul one time at Sam's office. 2 of the most genuine individuals that you ever want to meet. But Sam, with his connections, you know, his personal friend was Melvin Price, the congressman. In fact, I've got all the paperwork. I don't know if you remember, Mike, there was a lawsuit getting ready to be filed. And I got to be careful how I say this, but I don't know if there's any statute of limitations, but Melvin Price, the congressman at that time, is the one who helped Sam out of those problems. There was a trade issue.
Oh, right.
Yeah. But when Sam retired that night, Mel Price was in attendance along with Joe Garagiola came back to it. Gene Kiniski was there. Vern Gagne, as you said, Mike. It was kind of just almost as big as the party you put on for him.
I remember at the Chase, or maybe it was at the Chase after the Big Keel show, and I was lucky enough to shot Ric Flair's first Keel NWA title challenge against Harley. And here's a story involving Frank, Bruiser Brody, is that Flair was late. He was coming in with Patera from Mid-Atlantic, I guess on a Crockett chartered plane, you know, with all the problems Rick had with Crockett private planes and his own accident. But so he's coming in, but he's late. And Frank was the guy doing the belly aching in the back. And then he gave Patera and Flair shit when they got in late in the TR. And, you know, Frank was like a locker room leader, like today's fans would, you know, like Undertaker. And I go, well, you know, sort of, even though he wasn't always on every single Keel card, he was such a presence there. But those guys like apologized. They came in, you know, shook everybody's hand, specifically apologized for being late. But like even Patera was, you know, saying that they was throwing shade at Flair for them being late at this card. And I think in the opener, Dick the Bruiser was like in the opener. If you go back and look against two, I don't know if it was Bob Brown and Akio Sato, but it was like a typical amazing Keo card. Or I've told you this a million times. Told Darla the Harley race, Dory Funk. Was non-title, but it was still the main event. Or maybe it was because Harley was champ. Maybe it was a title match. But Dory loses his boot and just kept wrestling. And I kept asking on both. And Dory has a brand new glorious book, The Last of not Last of a Dying Breed, but it's a self-published book. It just came out. It's a terrific book. But I've even asked him about that thing. I go, was that a work? Was that like planned that you'd lose your boot, but you just valiantly keep wrestling with only one boot on? And I guess, I don't know. Do you know if that was legit in your mind?
No. I think he lost his boot from what he told me. I mean,
the boot just came off. I saw that with John Christolis in a tag match with Kowalski and Kenji Shibuya in Los Angeles in the main event. And I never seen that either worked into an angle. Even to this day, you think somebody from today's AEW or WCW or Billy Corgan's NWA would lift something like that because it was very memorable. You and I.
Well, and the Billy Corgan thing is another story because I've been dealing with Billy for the last year over the tapes, and in fact, I was just at a show in St. Louis a couple of weeks ago on that Sunday evening, and I went there because I was invited because J.J. Dillon was going to be there, and Haku, and those guys always come in for me when I need.
Rich was there.
Tommy Rich, Tom Pritchard was there. Ricky Morton. So
Ricky Morton's son is way over. He's a good kid, good hand.
Yeah, he was there that night. Yeah, so yeah. In fact, I'm going to bring him in.
That was just like a couple of weeks ago. How was that? It was 2 days of wrestling, big, long, very long cards, but then Fan Fest. And I think Billy has done a much better job. Dennis Coralluzzo would trans me in to photograph the 90s version of the NWA, which was, let's be honest, it was kind of pathetic. They did try to get all these different indies from Russ and my APW to Puerto Rico to, say they were part of the NWA briefly. But I think Billy, at least, is, he's got clout, he's got a lot of money, and I think he's doing like the best. It's not the real NWA, but he's doing a valiant.
There's no doubt he's trying, and I'll be honest with you. Like I said, I've had several phone calls with him. My attorney and I have conference calls over the tapes, and last year when he was in town was 73. We were there with the book because that's right when the Wrestling Chase book. Because that's actually the second book that I helped Larry with his.
Larry's book too, the first one.
Right, 20 some years ago it seems like, and then so we were there with him, but I think I may have disrupted him a little bit because I told him on one of the conference calls that unless he knows what the NWA actually meant, then all he did is bought 3 letters. I heard him on the radio the week that he was in town talking about how, it's nice to hear the stories, kind of like when Grandpa walked through the snow to go to school. That's a cute story, but people aren't interested in that now. Well, I disagree with that. I think old school is still alive if you do it the right way. I mean, I just had Nick Aldis in last night for our house show and did TV tapings today, and the fans sitting on the edge of their seat if old school. And when I talk about old school, I'm talking about the figure 4 leg lock being put on and the opponent reversing it, or the full Nelsons, or the good arm drags, and all the
chain wrestling.
Ad and chain wrestling.
It's what they call it.
Obviously, is the heart and soul of Corgan's promotion, the face of it. Very ethical guy. And Herb, you remember, he was the guy that gave Dory his. Now, we gave Dory, I helped with that in Tampa in 1995. That was the first time we gave Dory a plaque. But Nick Aldis gave a fantastic speech in 2018.
And like I said, and I had Tommy Rich in last month, and it's when you have those guys that come in. So I don't want to hear about old school's dead. And people say, "Oh, wrestling has changed," and I tell them no. A headlock is a headlock. It was in 1930 as it is today. An arm drag and a toss is the same way. What's changed in our business is 3 letters, and it's called ego. And this younger generation just does not understand what the fundamentals and the basics to go out there and do chain wrestling and tell a story. I mean, we've got stories that last sometimes 6 months. I mean, I'm getting ready to blow one off come October in a steel cage match with the Faces of Fear against the new Devastation Incorporated.
Oh, I love Devastation Incorporated. Who is the new Devastation Inc.?
They was a guy that was trained by Harley Race named Attila Khan and Sheik Prater, and their handler who knew Skandar pretty well, Stephen E. we call him. And it's a gimmick that is over like a hot cake, and of course the Faces of Fear is Haku and The Barbarian, and we had Haku in last October along with 10 other of the legends at a big show I did, and Dr. D. David Schultz and the Rock and Roll Express. Jerry Lawler was there and even wrestled for me, and so I'm bringing Haku, and he's bringing the Barbarian with him, and we're going to put
those guys are still in pretty good shape, aren't they?
Well, we talked about that.
Haku's sons are incredible. They're huge stars.
But Haku himself is still in good
shape. Haku can still go.
Sure. Yeah, he's going to be in Vegas with us here in a couple of weeks, and I just love him, and we've got a good working relationship, and that's one of the things, Mike, as you know, and I'll tell you real quick, my first encounter with Sam was at the Fairmount Park racetrack. Larry took me to dinner one night. Said, "Come on, we want to go to dinner. I want you to meet with somebody." And I had no idea until we got there. And there, Sam used to like to play the ponies, and he used to like to eat the steak dinners at the racetrack. They had a little restaurant there, and when we walked in there, and man, I'm thinking, holy, I'm sitting here with God, because I was that kid at the candy shop, and I was nervous as heck, and he's sitting there, and we ordered, and he said, Larry says that you're running these shows, but you want to learn more about the business, and what do you want to know? I said, well, I don't want to be no worker. I've never taken a bump, never will take a bump. But I said, I just want to learn more about the behind the curtain, like the wizard, and he was sitting there with that steak knife, and he was cutting his steak up, and I can see him today. He took that knife and he said, well, let me tell you something. He said, I'm going to tell you what I told Larry. He said he took that knife, and I thought, oh, wait a minute. I've heard all these horror stories about the business. I hope he ain't getting ready to cut my throat or something, because, back then the Bruiser and I had some issues because I was running in his territories in Southern Illinois, and he didn't like that. And he was making threats what he was going to do to us. And but then we ended up being friends, and Spike come to work for me. But Sam took that steak knife, and he said, you keep these open, pointed to his ears, and he said, pointed to his mouth, and said, you keep this closed, and you'll go a long way in this business. And he said, if you treat the boys right, they'll treat you right. And here, soon to be 50 years, I've had 3 guys that have stood me up, 4 if you want to count J.J. Dillon, but I don't count that because Mother Nature caused him not to show up. And he went on his social media and told all the fans, hey, I'm stranded. I'm on my way, but I'm not going to get there, but I'll make it up to you. But the first guy that ever stood me up was Buddy Landell,
Oh, no-show Bud Rowe. That was his nickname.
Yeah, I ended up replacing him at that time. Iceman King Parsons was really hot in the St. Louis area out of the Dallas TV with Fritz and Bill Ash, who we just lost.
How about Bill Ash, Mr. Bootmaker?
Yeah, Bill Ash was the one who I called Bill and said, look, I need a replacement real quick. And he said, well, you got a guy right there in St. Louis. And the quick story there, he lived in Richmond Heights, Missouri, and he just happened to be in town that weekend. And he said, well, I need a ride. You got to pick me up. And I said, okay. Well, I sent a limousine to pick him up. And he come over. We did the show. Like I said, I had, Tojo was on the card, and Gypsy and Frank Morrell, who was the angel underneath the hood, of course.
Yeah.
And when we got ready to leave that night, I went to pay him off, and the limousine was sitting outside there. And the guy who was driving the limousine started talking about how he had to get up the next morning to go do a funeral. And Iceman says, "What are you talking about?" He says, "Well, yeah, I work for the local funeral home. This car belongs to them." He wouldn't get in the car and go home. I had to get him another car to take him. So
he was on some of Larry's, when Larry started promoting after Sam retired. Iceman was on some of Larry's shows. I'm pretty sure. So I have those programs somewhere, Larry's program.
Well, we were,
maybe you were doing something in concert with Larry. I don't know.
Larry was doing, Larry and Fritz was doing some dealing, because just before Larry, he started his own promotion, and he'd already had, he had Nikolai was in, and he had, of course, Brody.
Randy was on some of those shows.
Well, yeah, Randy was on, and Tully Blanchard, but he was working. He brought Terry Gordy in, and they were getting ready to bring the Freebird storyline up here, and of course, when Vince came in and snuck the TV away from him, that's kind of what put the nail in the coffin there. But he had Bam Bam, and Tora Tanaka was in working for him, and of course, Tora had been doing independent stuff for me, and but if Larry and Frank, because Frank was kind of the behind the scene guys there, of course, in '88 when Frank got murdered, he was with Larry and I the week before. I had a restaurant and bar in Cahokia, Illinois, and we had our 1 year anniversary there, and he spent the whole weekend with us. And then that following Sunday is when he got killed. So,
tragedy. Can you tell us also, maybe, and I know it's hard to choose.
We're winding up. We want to let him get his plugs in.
That's fine. I just wanted to ask what your favorite match was when you were
Sure.
one of the ones that you promoted. If we can just find out, I'm just very curious. I know it's
the ones that I promoted, man. I tell you, Lou Thez never wrestled for me, but he did special guest referees for me. I would say probably, and it wasn't a match that I booked, but Larry and I had the opportunity of sitting in an empty arena at the fairgrounds, where I'll be running back on October 1st. We had a show that night, and they were doing a big, Frank was doing a big thing in Japan, and they were going to have Lou over there as a special guest referee. And Larry called and said, "Hey, can we let Frank and Lou get in the ring Saturday before the show? They want to go in there, and Lou's going to show him a few things." And I said, "Only if I can be there." And so we sat there for 3 hours on that Saturday afternoon, and I got to watch Frank Goodish and Lou Thez roll around the ring, and Lou was showing him some chain wrestling, and I mean, I don't think I blinked at all.
That's awesome.
I was just so amazed.
Take some pictures of it. Is there any photographs?
Yes, and what I remember about it is after they got through, because we had a show to put on that night. They get out. Lou went over and grabbed a folding chair, leaned it up against the wall, and did 188 push-ups. I stood there and counted them after he'd been in the ring with 3 hours with Bruiser Brody. So he went back to dress out, get cleaned up, and because he was going to referee that night for me. And Frank was standing there, and Larry says, "Hey, what was it like being in the ring with the old timer?" And he said, "Let me tell you something." He says, "When that old guy gets a hold of your wrist, it's not if you're going, it's where you're going." And Frank said he learned more in 3 hours than he learned in probably his early lifetime, just from being in there with Lou Thez. And that always sticks on my mind. One of the other ones I really liked was Cowboy Bob Ellis. I didn't book it, but I was there against Buddy Rogers. And that's when they were doing the Nobody Can Break the Figure 4 leg lock. And I always remembered that. That's always stuck out in my mind as one of the all-time feuds in St. Louis, or anything Fritz von Erich was involved in. But, you said earlier, you asked about, who the guys that came through, Edouard Carpentier, Red Bastien, all of those guys came through St. Louis.
Well, I was there too for Baba, the rematch between Baba and Briscoe, because Briscoe
Yeah.
over, dropped
Briscoe.
the strap.
Tell me a bigger feud than the Briscoes and the Funks in St. Louis.
No, Yeah, no, everything was there, and the one TV. I was talking this up to Darla. I was at the Chase for it's the Funks against Kiniski and Jack Briscoe on free TV.
On TV, something you never hear of.
That's about as great a tag match as I've ever seen. I didn't mean to interrupt Russ earlier, but let's let you plug everything. Wrestling at the Chase, the book, still available, still terrific. Everybody needs it. Obviously, the holidays are coming up. Where, Herb, do you want people to purchase this book? Wrestling.
It's on Amazon.com or all the local bookstores. I'm assuming, like I said, Ed Wheatley, the author, great guy. Spent a lot of time working on it. Real quick, when he, when his publishing company called me and asked if I'd be involved, I originally told him no, because I said I've already helped do a book with Larry Matisek, and they said, well, would you at least talk to the author? And so they set up a meeting. He came over, and they'd asked me to bring some of the memorabilia that I had on Wrestling at the Chase, and I had a couple of tables full of it laid out when he walked in. And I mean, he was like the kid at the candy shop because he didn't realize. I mean, I've actually got a little pendant that's got KPLR TV Channel 11 on the one side of it. And on the other side, it's Wrestling at the Chase, and it's admit one bearer and the number 44, which I haven't been able to confirm yet, but I was told it was Lou Thesz's. And it was ones that Sam used to give out to VIPs. They could bring guests in with them. And I carry that on my keychain. So, so Ed was, he was excited with that. He's seen all the stuff that I had, and he even gives me credit in the book. On the back of the credits, it says that, if it wasn't for Herb Simmons, this book wouldn't be made possible.
Nice.
And then we just did, I don't know if you know, Mike, we just published a documentary, and it's on 9 PBS. We did the premiere a month and a half ago here in St. Louis at Channel 9. It's called Head Over Heels, the story of wrestling at the Chase. So,
is that online? Can people watch it?
It's online. Yeah, it's online.
How would they find it?
It's Head Over Heels, the story of wrestling at the Chase, and Ed is the one who produced that with the local news guy. And like I said, I was honored to take part of that. SICW is all through it. They came over. Cowboy Bob Orton Jr. runs my Ace Wrestling Academy for me.
And then how about the information on your academy and the Fed that you run?
Southern Illinois Championship Wrestling.
Yeah, it's Southern Illinois Championship Wrestling. Like I said, I'm the easiest guy to find on social media, on Facebook, SICW.org. Like I said, we had a show last night. We had Nick Aldis there. We did TV today. This coming Thursday, we're at the historical Missouri Athletic Club in St. Louis, Missouri for a private show. We've got Sergeant Slaughter, Jerry Lawler, and Jimmy Hart coming in for that. I've got on next Saturday, we're in Sandoval, Illinois with Cowboy Bob Orton Jr. there. September 24th, we're in Fairmont City, fundraiser. And that's what we've done for 50 years. We've helped fire departments, police departments, nonprofit organizations raise money. I've been in fire departments for 10, 15 years every year, helping them raise money. One of them over 8 years, we've raised them over $40,000 in proceeds. October 1st, the big card, the fairgrounds, we've got Loverboy Dennis Condrey coming in.
Oh.
Dan DeBeast Severin will be there along with the Faces of Fear. And I think there's one other one I can't remember who it is. There's 4 or 5 of them I got on that card, but it's that's a fundraiser also. And then we're actually booking shows all the way into March of next year.
Wow. As you said, you really believe in long-term booking.
Well, I believe in booking backwards, and Sam taught us that many years ago. I know where I want to be 6 months to a year out. I just got to know how to get there, and I know who I want to have in my key spots. If everybody stays healthy and stays with me, and I start from that period of time out and booking my matches backwards.
Wow, that's really terrific. Well, next time we won't have all the hang-ups on Skype, so we got it all set with you now. So we'd really love to have you back again on the show.
I want to have him on to talk about Buddy Rogers' history in St. Louis and Fritz von Erich and many of these guys.
I'm more interested in the Fed that you manage now. I think that I'm fascinated.
We didn't even get into his Fed, really.
Yeah, no, and I'm interested to hear some of the things that you talk about wrestling philosophy. I think that you have hit some number of things that we've talked about on the show repeatedly, and I might want to make you part of a forum of some other folks that we could all talk about indie wrestling today and the territories, and maybe what can be done to make them a little bit more feasible.
Well, and the one thing is I'm very vocal about the independent, even though it is, I hate the word independent because as I tell some of the other promoters that there's only a few of them that I will work with because some of them you can't work with because they don't understand territories. I've got 2 of them in Missouri that I work with on a regular basis. I got Bert Prentice was a good friend of mine down in Tennessee. I used to do work with USA Championship Wrestling, but Mike, you've been in the business long enough and Russell. There are promoters out there that think about one thing and one thing only, and that's what I tell the younger generation nowadays. And that's why I've got guys that's been with me just today at our TV booking a meeting before we started taping. The experience that I've got in the locker room, I've got guys that's been with me for 30 years now that are still getting out there doing the work, and they started with me young. And then with Bob running the Ace Wrestling Academy for me, they train on Tuesdays and Thursday nights, and I get a kick out of Bob. He'll come over and sit there, and he's got a couple of our younger guys that get in there and do a lot of the rolling around with him. But he'll still lace the boots up. He was just in the show last month for me. His first cadet that graduated, his first student. We did a teacher and a graduate. We built up a feud, and then we tagged them together against my big heel team. And
it's all amazing stuff. We'd love to hear more about it, so we'll have you on the show again very soon. So that's all we have time for this week.
And thanks for lending your credibility to this show as you do in your own locker room.
Hey, anytime, Mike, anytime you need anything, I'm there for you.
All right, that's it for this week. We'll see everyone next week. Good night, everybody.
どうもありがとうございました。